Ethan was 36, tired all the time, and quietly losing respect for his own life. He lived in a small town in Ohio, worked maintenance at a storage facility, and woke up every morning with the same promise: today will be different. But almost every day began the same way. His alarm rang at 6. His hand reached for his phone by 6:01. By 6:08 he had already seen bad news, unpaid bills, 2 work messages, and a smiling photo of someone else winning at life while he still stood in yesterday's sweatpants. That was how the first hour stole him. Not with some dramatic disaster, not with one giant mistake, but with a slow collapse of attention, energy, and self-command before the day had even started. And the worst part was this: Ethan thought his real problem was money, or stress, or lack of motivation. Most people do, but he was wrong. Because the first hour after you wake up does something dangerous. It does not just start your day, it tells your mind who is in control. And when that hour begins with noise, panic, and reaction, the rest of your life often follows the same pattern. In this story, you will see how one ordinary man discovered a truth that changed the way he worked, thought, and carried himself. You will also see the one mistake he made in the first 8 minutes every morning that was quietly wrecking everything. And once you notice it, you may never look at your mornings the same way again. Ethan lived in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat that never seemed to sleep. At 5:30 inches the morning, the machines downstairs were already rumbling, shaking the thin floor beneath his bed. His alarm went off at 6, but most days he was already half awake, not from rest, but from tension. He worked 6 days a week, about 52 hours on average, fixing broken locks, cleaning units, and dealing with frustrated customers who always seemed to arrive at the worst time. His paycheck was just enough to cover rent, groceries, and the minimum payment on a credit card that had been stuck around $3,200 for almost a year. Every month felt like a reset to zero. But the real problem was not his job. It was how every morning began. The moment his alarm stopped, his hand moved automatically. Phone first, always. Notifications flooded in before his brain even had a chance to think clearly. Work messages, news alerts, social media. Within minutes, his mind was no longer his own. It was reacting, comparing, worrying. By 6:12, he was already behind. He would rush to the bathroom, skip breakfast more often than not, and throw on yesterday's jeans because they were good enough. Coffee became less of a choice and more of a rescue. A cheap $2.50 cup from the gas station down the street, grabbed while checking more messages he did not even remember reading. And without realizing it, he carried that same energy into the rest of his day. He reacted instead of deciding. He avoided instead of fixing. Small tasks piled up because his mind never felt clear enough to take control. Even simple things like calling the bank or organizing his expenses felt heavier than they should. He told himself he just needed more time, or a better job, or less stress. But every day started the same way, and every day ended with the same quiet frustration. Because deep down, Ethan could feel something uncomfortable growing. He was not just tired, he was losing direction. And the scariest part was this: nothing in his life looked broken enough to force a change. But that was about to shift, because his mornings looked small, almost harmless, just a phone, a rush, a cup of coffee. But the damage did not stay small. At first, the consequences were quiet. A missed call, a delayed task, a small mistake that did not seem important enough to fix immediately. Ethan told himself it was normal. Everyone was busy. Everyone felt behind. But small things started stacking in ways he could no longer ignore. One Tuesday morning, he forgot to log a unit repair that should have taken less than 5 minutes. By the afternoon, a customer showed up angry, claiming no one had fixed the lock. Ethan stood there, keys in hand, trying to explain something he could not clearly remember doing. His manager did not yell. That almost made it worse. He just said, "You've been slipping lately." That sentence stayed with him longer than it should have. 3 days later, something else hit harder. Ethan opened his email during his usual rushed morning scroll. A subject line caught his eye immediately. Final notice. He stared at the number. $184 overdue on his electricity bill. He had seen the earlier warnings, but they were buried between messages, half read while brushing his teeth or walking out the door. This one was different. One more late payment and service may be interrupted Friday. Friday, 4 days away. For the first time, the pressure had a clock attached to it. And here is the part nobody expects. The problem was never his schedule. Ethan had the same 24 hours as before, the same job, the same responsibilities, but his mind was constantly scattered before the day even began. Decisions felt heavier, focus felt shorter. Even simple problems stretched into something exhausting. That morning, he sat at the edge of his bed, phone still in his hand, reading the same email 3 times without taking action. Not because he did not care, but because he already felt defeated before the day started. And that feeling leaked into everything. He snapped at a coworker over something small. He ignored a second reminder from the bank. He told himself he would handle it tonight, even though he knew how that usually ended. Avoidance, delay, more pressure. By the end of the week, Ethan was not just dealing with bills or work mistakes. He was facing something deeper, a growing fear that his life was slowly drifting into a version he did not choose. And the worst part was this. Nothing dramatic had happened. No big failure, no sudden collapse, just small, repeated mornings that quietly pushed him further away from control. Then, one morning, the cost finally became impossible to ignore. Daniel did not feel motivated that night. He felt cornered. There is a difference. Motivation fades when things get uncomfortable, but pressure forces a decision. He sat there for almost 10 minutes, staring at his alarm settings. 6 a.m., the time that had failed him over and over again. For a moment, he almost did what he always did. He told himself he would try harder tomorrow, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the lost $140. Maybe it was the look from his coworkers. Or maybe it was the quiet fear that this would keep happening again and again. So instead of making a promise, he made a change. He set his alarm to 5 a.m., not because he suddenly believed in discipline, not because he felt ready, but because he realized something simple. Waking up at the same time that kept failing him would only repeat the same result. He placed his phone on the other side of the room, far enough that he would have to stand up to turn it off. Then he did one more thing. He wrote a short note and left it next to the phone. Get up, or stay stuck. No long speech, no complicated plan, just a clear choice. That night, he did not sleep perfectly. He woke up twice, checking the time, feeling the pressure of the morning ahead. But for the first time in a long time, he went to bed with intention. Because this was no longer about waking up early. It was about taking back control. And what happened at 5 a.m. the next morning was not what he expected. The next morning felt strange. Ethan woke up at 6. The alarm rang, but his phone was not in his hand. It was across the room. For a split second, his brain reached for the old pattern. Scroll, noise, reaction. But instead, he had to sit up, then stand, then walk. 3 extra steps. That was all it took to interrupt something that had controlled him for years. Later that day, he found Carl again. I moved my phone, Ethan said. That is it? Carl nodded slightly. That is step 1. But if you stop there, nothing changes. Ethan waited. Carl pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was worn, like something he had carried for years. First hour system, he said. Simple, not easy, but it works if you actually do it. Ethan looked down. 6 steps. No motivation, no complicated theory, just actions. Carl pointed to it. Do not think about it. Just follow it. First hour system. Wake up, stand immediately, no snooze. Delay phone use for 30 minutes minimum. Drink water before caffeine. Sit still and plan top 3 tasks. Move body for 5 minutes minimum. Start first task before leaving home. Ethan read it twice. It did not look impressive. No life hacks, no big promises, just small, controlled actions stacked in order. "That is it?" he asked. Carl smiled slightly. "That is more than most people will ever do consistently." Then he added something Ethan did not expect. "This is not about productivity. It is about authority." Ethan looked up. "When you wake up and immediately react to the world, you teach your brain something," Carl said. "You are not in charge. But when you follow a system, even a small one, you send a different signal." "What signal?" Carl tapped the paper once. "I decide what happens next." That line stayed with Ethan longer than anything else, because it was not about becoming perfect. It was about becoming deliberate. That night, Ethan placed the paper on the small table next to his bed. He also filled a glass of water and left it there. Not because it was impressive, but because it removed one more excuse. At 6 the next morning, the alarm rang again. This time, he stood up immediately. No snooze, no scroll, no negotiation, just action. The system looked almost too small to matter until he lived it. The first week was not impressive. Ethan did not wake up transformed. He did not suddenly feel motivated or disciplined. In fact, most mornings felt awkward, slower than before, almost uncomfortable. On day 1, he still reached for his phone out of habit. His hand stopped halfway, hovering in the air before dropping back down. That small pause felt like resistance inside his own body. On day 2, he followed the steps, but his mind kept drifting. When he sat to plan his top 3 tasks, he stared at the paper for almost 2 minutes before writing anything. It felt unnatural to think before reacting. On day 3, he skipped the movement step entirely, told himself he was too tired. By noon, he noticed the difference. His energy dropped faster, his focus scattered again. But this time, something changed. He noticed it. That was new. Before, his days blurred together. Now, small differences became visible. Cause and effect started to connect. By the end of the first week, he had followed the system 5 out of 7 days. Not perfect, but not random anymore. And that alone shifted something. Here is the part most people miss. He did not need a better life first. He needed a better first hour. In the second week, things became slightly easier. Not because the system changed, but because the friction decreased. Standing up immediately felt less like a fight. Drinking water before coffee became automatic. The 5-minute movement still felt small, but it woke his body up in a way caffeine never did. One morning, something subtle happened. Ethan sat down, wrote his top 3 tasks, and actually started the first one before leaving his apartment. It was a simple task, calling the electricity company, something he had avoided for days. The call lasted 8 minutes. The problem was resolved. No stress, no delay, no build-up. That moment stayed with him longer than it should have, because it proved something dangerous. The problem was never as big as his avoidance made it feel. By week 3, his mornings stopped feeling rushed. Not slower in time, but calmer in direction. He still woke up at 6, still had the same job, still had the same bills, but the feeling of being chased started to disappear. His coworkers noticed it before he did. "You seem different lately," one of them said. Ethan shrugged it off. But inside, he knew what changed. He was not reacting anymore. He was starting, and that small shift began to leak into everything else. He handled tasks earlier, spoke more clearly. Even his posture changed slightly, less collapsed, more steady. But progress is easy to trust on quiet days. The real test comes under pressure. The opportunity came quietly. No big announcement, no dramatic buildup, just a conversation. One afternoon, Daniel's supervisor walked up to him and said, "We've been having issues with inventory errors again, missing items. Wrong counts. It's costing us money. Daniel nodded. That was nothing new. But then came the sentence that changed everything. We need someone to help fix it. Temporary role, more responsibility, slight pay increase. You interested? For a second, Daniel froze. This was the kind of chance he used to think about and avoid, because it meant pressure. It meant expectations. It meant the risk of failing in front of others. Old Daniel would have said, "I'll think about it," which really meant no. But now, something was different. Not confidence, not certainty, just a quiet voice. "You've been preparing for this." He said yes. The next morning, the test began. 5 a.m. The alarm rang, louder than usual in the silence of his room. His body felt heavier than ever. His mind started negotiating again. "You need sleep. This is too much. You can skip just today." This was the real test. Not the job, not the responsibility, but whether he would break the system or follow it. He sat up, slow, tired, uncertain, but he followed the list. Water, no phone, movement, 2, 5-minute focus. That morning, instead of random learning, he focused on one thing: inventory systems, basic tracking methods, simple spreadsheets, how to organize data clearly. Nothing advanced, but enough to start. At work, the pressure hit immediately. Confused records, boxes in the wrong sections, numbers that did not match reality. It looked overwhelming. For a moment, doubt returned. This is too big. But then he did something different. He did not try to fix everything. He applied the same rule he had followed every morning. One small task. He picked one section, one category, one problem, and he fixed that. Then the next, then the next. Day by day, the system improved. Not perfectly, not instantly, but consistently. After 3 weeks, something changed. The error rate dropped. The system became clearer. The chaos started to make sense. One afternoon, the supervisor called him in. He expected criticism. Instead, he heard, "We've never seen it this organized before." A week later, the temporary role became permanent. His pay increased by $300 a month. Not life-changing money, but something more important changed. Daniel was no longer the man who tried. He was the man who followed through. And that identity was built at 5 a.m. Because the real secret was never about waking up early. It was about proving to yourself every single day that you do what you said you would do. Most people believe their life changes when something big happens. A new job, more money, a breakthrough moment, some kind of motivation that finally lasts. But that belief is the reason nothing changes, because it keeps you waiting, waiting for the right time, waiting to feel ready, waiting for something outside you to fix what feels off inside you. Ethan's story proves something much simpler. Life does not change when you feel different. It changes when you start different. And that change often begins in a place most people ignore. The first hour. Not because mornings are magical, but because they are mechanical. The first hour shapes your state. Your state shapes your decisions. Your decisions shape your actions. Your actions shape your identity. And your identity quietly builds your life. Break that chain at the start, and everything else shifts with it. Ignore it, and even the best intentions fade before noon. Here is the truth most people miss. Discipline is not built through intensity. It is built through order. Small, repeatable actions that remove chaos before it begins. Ethan did not fix his finances overnight. He did not suddenly become a different person, but he stopped losing control before his day even started. And that gave him something he had not felt in a long time: direction. If you look closely at your own life, you may notice the same pattern. Not in the big moments, but in the first 30 minutes, you usually give away without thinking. So here is a simple challenge. Tomorrow morning, protect your first hour. Not perfectly, but deliberately. Then watch what changes over the next 7 days. And if this story made you see your mornings differently, tell me one thing you will change first. Subscribe for more stories that help you take control of the parts of life most people overlook.